America's first hot air balloon ride happened in Philadelphia from a prison yard. Imagine this, it's a cold January morning. This gigantic yellow silk balloon inflates and flies from Philadelphia all the way to Woodbury, New Jersey. Not only was it carrying a person, it was also carrying a letter from George Washington, making it the first example of airmail. Let's talk about Jean-Pierre Blanchard and how he shaped America. Welcome to the 52 Weeks of First podcast, brought to you by Philadelphia's Historic District and Visit Philly. I'm Marisa Magnatta from the Preston and Steve Show on Philly's rock station 93.3 WMMR, and I love everything about this city, especially the history that has just shaped the world. Every week we're going to drop a new episode, and we hope to share some knowledge with you and learn how Philadelphia has affected your region. Today, we're learning about America's first hot air balloon ride, and we have a very special guest, Nick Pittman, who you know as Nor'easter Nick. 15 to 20 million people every month are watching his stories, and he's here to share with us how weather affected the balloon ride.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be here, and I can't wait to dive in to this story because it's so interesting. You know, I'm not from Philly, but I consider myself a Philly guy. I grew up in Brigantine, but this has always been the city to me. So everything that has happened here, I think, is important to not only our region, but the country and the world writ large.
Yeah, and look, one hot air balloon ride connected Philadelphia with New Jersey in just under an hour, hundreds of years ago.
Exactly. In fact, there is, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a water tower in Deptford around Woodbury. That is where the site of the landing was. And
wow.
It's painted right there. And when we moved into the area, we're like, oh, I wonder what this is. Now we know the other side of it. So pretty cool, right?
Well, let's get started.
Sure.
I mean, why do you think a prison became the ideal space to launch this first hot air balloon?
Well, you have to go back in time to that period and, obviously think that there were a lot of trees around at that point. There were a lot of buildings around as well. So you don't really think about a prison as a safe space, so to say. I mean, I guess it could, depending on your, interpretation of it. But yeah, no, from safe from extreme winds at the surface, extreme, issues with public trying to see everything. But it's an open space. It's away from everything else and away from trees and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that makes sense. With the walls around, It was protecting the area. Right. And then I'm sure they were able to invite people to come in and watch because it always has to be a spectacle.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Draw attention. Well, Jean-Pierre Blanchard was already a daredevil.
Right.
He had multiple, I think 40 plus hot air balloon rides in Europe. So when he came here to Philadelphia, that seemed to be a great space to take off from, a controlled area. Right. And like you said, always people watching. Yeah. You want to share these, right?
Right. And I think he had to have nerves of steel because, taking off in January alone, even in today's world with the technology that we have and the instruments that we have, that's risky enough. But you go back to 1793 where we had none of that. He was literally taking his life into his own hands and just throwing it up to the atmosphere, so to say. You can't control those things, different wind directions, different wind speeds at different heights. And they didn't really know a whole lot about the upper atmosphere. That was the first taste of what modern day balloons use for weather data. And it's really neat that it goes back that far.
Well, so what was the weather like in January of 1793?
Well, let me say.
I almost made that same action. I was like, that's not proper.
Well, I didn't even wash my hands, so now I'm probably going to get COVID or something, so thanks. I know, you know what, January, it's typically cold. You go back into the 1700s and there was more snow around. We don't get as much snow today as we did even 50, 60, 70 years ago. So you go back in the 1700s, more of that. It was probably a clear, sunny day. Temperatures, I would say, generally in the 20s or 30s. And the thing is, in January, the wind patterns are much more erratic than in other parts of the year. You have a temperature differentiation between the top of the atmosphere and the bottom, and you have wild systems that are rolling through all the time. So it was probably windy and cruising along at even 15, 20 miles an hour can seem kind of harrowing from, 3, 4, 5,000 feet above. But going back in time, I think it was probably a decent day, or they probably wouldn't have done the launch in the first place, right?
Well, how does weather affect a hot air balloon launch?
Well, it is the most important aspect of everything. So first and foremost, the cold air is more dense than warm air in the summer. So automatically, you're going to have more of an issue trying to take off. That is why they chose hydrogen, because hydrogen is 14 times lighter than air. Now, of course, there is an issue with hydrogen that we would find out, many, many years later. But their objective at that time was just getting up into the atmosphere. And as they did, since the hydrogen is lighter, once you're above that initial surface layer of the atmosphere, it is easier to rise. So now you're up there. Now you are totally subjected to, all right, well, what's the wind doing at that level? So like I said, at each level, the wind is coming in a different direction at a different speed. And you're basically just sitting there. You are a sitting duck for whatever the atmosphere wants to do. Temperature plays a big role. Humidity plays a big role in everything as well. But it's predominantly the wind and what that overall pattern is going to do to determine where you're going to go, because you could end up spotting yourself down in a place that you didn't even expect. You can only control going up and down. You can't really control side to side because Mother Nature is just going to do that naturally.
Well, and it's funny, you talk about Mother Nature and its effects on this hot air balloon, and I'm thinking cold, humidity. These are all the things that Philadelphia has. Now, how would this have maybe changed if they had done it somewhere else in the country?
Well, your air density would have changed. Like if you did it in the Southwest, you have much drier air. Every part of the country has different characteristics. And I think we probably had the most difficult conditions to overcome in this area. So not only was it a successful flight, but you ended up using this as a catalyst to create the weather balloons that we see today. But I want to back up a second, because what I find most interesting about this, where do you think they got the hydrogen from?
Please tell me.
So they used iron filings and acid. So the chemical reaction created the hydrogen gas. So they weren't just pulling up with tankfuls of hydrogen to fill up the balloons. They were physically creating a science experiment, a chemistry experiment in an uncontrolled environment. So it was risky from the start. Hydrogen is also flammable, as we very well are aware of that. The farther up in the atmosphere you go, because you couldn't really know beforehand without instruments what the lift was looking like, what the updrafts were looking like. If you went too far up in the atmosphere, the hydrogen could have actually expanded and exploded. In the winter, you also have static electricity. So, like when you're shopping, you're at the grocery store and you go to grab a can of corn and ouch, that hurts,
that
right?
shock.
Right. That can happen with hot air balloons, that there's metal. So that spark could have created an issue with being flammable and end in disaster for sure.
This is why we don't see hydrogen balloons anymore.
So hydrogen balloons actually still exist.
Okay.
In weather, hydrogen's used every day. So all over the world, you have balloons. There's over 100 different sites in the United States twice a day. And all of that data is fed into our weather forecast model. So we have an understanding of what's going on. And, it's funny, you go back to the principles of 1793 with that first flight, and we, meteorologists, forecasters, are still looking at, hey, that balloon drifted to the east by 5 miles more than we expected. And then we extrapolate that data and figure out the exact wind speed and wind direction, and that helps us forecast forward. So I think it's extremely interesting that was literally the father. Philadelphia is the birthplace of weather balloons. So yes, hydrogen is still used. Helium is also used, but helium is more expensive and less accessible for a lot of folks. But like passenger hydrogen balloons, no, that is not a thing anymore. So many things they couldn't control back then, comfort of the pilot. You go up in altitude and the temperature goes down, typically speaking, unless there's an inversion. So you can only imagine you get up there and it's already cold in the heart of the winter, but you get up there, you only have coats. You didn't have heaters. You didn't have any of that stuff. So, not very popular. I'm sure they could do it today more safely, but I think it would just be a huge expense.
Wow. This one ride out of Philadelphia in 1793, setting off all of this information for modern day meteorology.
Right.
Was there any weather information that they were already using?
Well, we would like to consider Benjamin Franklin as the father of meteorology, right? I feel like people back then were smarter than us today. They were Renaissance people, right? So Benjamin Franklin had a deep passion for weather, the key and the kite, all that stuff. He started documenting temperature, humidity, dew point, all that kind of stuff. So they had the rudimentary tools, but they certainly didn't have the tools necessary to measure what that stuff was doing at different heights of the atmosphere and be able to predict where their flight was going to end up going.
Wow. I just am so intrigued by these Philly firsts that really shaped the nation and helped us grow as a society and a community.
Absolutely.
And just technology in general is
I know.
Right here out of Philadelphia.
It's an amazing city,
yes.
And I love everything about it.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Sharing your knowledge. And we just look forward to the future and what's next in all of this technology.
Yeah, I might go buy a hydrogen balloon and you might see me drifting over the bridge.
Let's do it by the key downtown.
Let's do it. Sounds good.
And thank you for joining us on this week's journey of 52 weeks of firsts. We're dropping a new episode every week. Join along and follow us on social media at 52 Firsts Philly for more information.